Hello, every folks, and good morning. Welcome to a discussion here on war crimes, namely of the many different characters they run into, or at least most of the faction commanders. Obviously, we don't have everybody because there simply would not be enough space, but of the notable faction leaders and/or kind of scary people, who actually committed the most war crimes? This is actually something that I want to look into throughout the entire series, but we're just going to start off with Tactics Ogre for the time being. First and foremost, sorry for the kind of sloppy Photoshop job. I kind of noticed at the last minute that several of them, for whatever reason, got overwritten when I saved it. So, for example, we got Balzaphon, Barbas, and go figure Denim over here, who just kind of ended up getting taken out of the picture when I saved it the first time. Yeah, not sure what that was about, but anyways, here's how we're going to go ahead and do this. So, recently I was going and looking through the definitions of what exactly a war crime would be, just to see kind of what was going on there, you know, kind of as you do. It turns out that the UN just kind of has a long list of things that are considered war crimes. Now, in some cases, we don't necessarily have exact numbers for how many times somebody did one thing or another, but we're just going to go ahead and you know, obviously they're going to vary in terms of severity or whatever else. So we're just going to kind of ballpark this, where, you know, like, let's say, you know, in multiple cases, there's going to be people that have, you know, willingly done a thing, going into the situation, knowing the numbers, and even though we don't know that they necessarily carried out those numbers, like, for example, if we started off with Duke Ronway, like, his starting score would basically be 5,000. Because in his particular case, he willingly knew the numbers going into the situation. He had ordered, you know, the place to be attacked. So, in his case, you know, he would be starting off with a pretty heavy toll on his head there. Now, granted, in this particular case, this also would apply to Lenar, who carried out the order. As I understand it, it would apply to both anyway, so, you know, those two would pretty much start off with a pretty high score there. And additionally, you know, we're just going to be going through all the statutes one by one and, you know, giving them a score as we go along. Hey y'all, so quick little editing note here. So after the fact, I kind of decided that it was kind of going to be a little bit of a different pricing structure for all of this stuff, where, like, if there's a minor individual war crime, like one person affected one person in a way that is technically not too far out of the norm in this universe, then it only counted as one. But as far as major war crimes, the stuff that would definitely land somebody in some hot water, that would be worth 500, whereas somewhere in the middle might be around 100. Something that was technically minor but maybe done more than once or something along those lines was a 10, whereas something that was relatively severe but maybe not fully intentional was around a 250, whereas some of the other ones that are just like straight up direct decisions that were absolutely monstrous were counted as far as the individuals that were directly affected. So those were going to be those situations where, like, you had your Ronways and your Lenars, and especially Rowdy Roddy, but we'll get to that in a little bit here. But I just wanted to go ahead and clarify that real quick as far as the pricing structure for our war crimes, and let's get back to it. Okay, so we're going to start off here with Article 8, Section 1-A. For the purpose of this statute, war crimes means grave breaches of the Geneva Conventions of the 12th of August 1949, namely any of the following acts against persons or property protected under the provisions of the relevant Geneva Convention. One would be willful killing, so I would definitely take that as 5,000 for them too. He was just following his orders, but still he carried him out. You know, definitely for this guy as well. We don't know how many political actors there were for Balzaphon and Tardy's rebellion there. I'm just going to chalk them down to, I think at one point I had heard that it was about like 250 as far as the members of their kind of like their heads of state or whatever else. But we're going to ballpark it to about a 250 as a starting score for them. Additionally, for him, we'll actually go ahead and turn this red here so it's a little bit easier to read. Or, I guess it's kind of like a pinkish. There we go. This is going to be weird to figure out exactly, but okay. Go ahead and give him his 250. He also gets about 250. The other ones were implicit in it to some degree, but we don't know how much. Like, they seem to have been involved, but my understanding is that they were kind of added after the fact. Let's see. As far as other willful killing incidents go, we obviously have to go and talk about Balbatos over here. In his particular case, we again don't have any exact numbers as far as I'm aware, but very, very, very ballparking it here. Balmamusa is basically just a gigantic collection pile for all of the Wallister that were part of his whole genocide situation. So presumably, I was assumed it was always about 3 times that he had purged over the years. So we'll just go ahead and assume that it's about 15,000 for him here, and go ahead and start off from there. As far as Roderick goes, now, technically speaking, there's other statutes that Rowdy Roddy's actions fall into as well, including the kind of intentional decimation of structures and land and whatever else. But we know that in his particular case, there were several cases where he had gone and just obliterated an entire city, obliterated an entire countryside using weapons that he knew would do that exact thing. So given that we don't have exact numbers, I'm just going to ballpark it to about, 500,000 in his particular case. We're just going to shorten it here because it would take up a lot of space, and realistically, I don't expect that he'll come up too often on this list. We'll adjust as needed. Anyway, let's see. As far as Dorgaloa goes, I don't believe we get any exact numbers as far as him directly, willfully killing stuff. He mostly convinces people to join each other together. In Zabos's case, he's mostly on the defensive whenever we see him. There is a possibility that there are other situations where he's involved in more direct killing actions. We don't know for sure. I'm going to ballpark it to about 100 there, given that we don't exactly know what his actions are, but he's primarily defending most of the time that we see him. Now that I think about it, I probably could have included Yunin on this list, but again, we don't know for sure. In Barbas's case, we know that he's the one that ordered the attack on Rhyme, and they say that it's pretty close to what Balmamusa was. I forget if there's any exact numbers, but we'll go ahead and match that number there, dropping him at about a 5,000. Alright. And actually, just to make this a little bit easier, let's go ahead and make it a little bit smaller. I guess we could have done that this whole time, huh? Anyway, we'll also go ahead and switch it to, let's say, a light blue. Why not? There we go. Alright, next up, as far as willful killing goes, we have Mardim, and we know for a fact that he goes out of his way to kind of kill whenever possible. In terms of the direct fights that we see him killing units of various kinds, in Goliath there, we see that he's allegedly responsible for hundreds of deaths. He seems to personally relish in the fact that he's getting a chance to do that kind of thing, and we'll touch upon this later, but his weapon itself is a frickin' war crime. So either way, this smarmy bastard, we're going to go ahead and ballpark it on the low end here, and start him off at about a 1,500 kill count. And I would say that's as far as him personally, it just seems about right. That could be wrong, but we'll adjust as needed. Alright, next up we have Oz, who is in a kind of similar place. We'll get onto more of his willful killing incidents later. We do directly see him doing the same thing as Mardim there, as far as willfully killing innocents. But in his particular case, he mostly seems to be doing it because it's his job there, and he just enjoys doing his job. So we'll give him a slightly lower ballpark at about 1,000, but this number will go up later. Just to match his in-game elements and whatever else, we'll go ahead and switch him over to a kind of like dark purple here, and that looks good right there. Alright, let's see. As far as Kashua, Vice, and Denim are concerned, as far as Kashua, Vice, and Denim are concerned, in their particular case, I would say that at the very start is the only time that they are directly going and attempting to kill somebody that, is directly going to knowingly result in their death. They have no other reason to do so other than they just want to go out and kill them. But aside from that, most of the rest of it could be argued as self-defense. Don't worry, they have plenty of war crimes, we'll get to that. But in their particular case, I don't think anything outside of their initial attack, which fails anyway, as in they never even get a chance to carry it out because they carry it out on the wrong guy, basically, I don't think it's anything that they could reasonably be tried for at that point, because it's chaos, they're trying to attack somebody else, they fail completely, nobody else really hears about it, all anyone hears about is their heroism in that case, even if, realistically it was probably somebody else's doing. Either way, I'm going to say that they're probably exempt from the willful killing part, depending on your playthrough. We'll get onto the other parts of that later, like I said, kind of TBD on that one. Alright. So, next up we have Nibith. Now, as far as I've seen, I don't think we directly see Nibith going and willfully killing stuff. He collects a lot of dead bodies, but we never directly see him going out of his way to create more. He sees it as beneath him, as far as I can tell. So, I'm going to leave him empty for the time being. Branton Morn primarily seems to be concerned with power. We see him willfully killing in a few instances. I want to say that there's at least, I want to say it's the attack on Goliath, as well as killing off the original Dorgalwa there. So we're just going to go ahead and assume, like Goliath there, that, fairly low population. I'm going to assume again in about the 1500 ballpark. But we're going to say 1501 in his particular case, since he seems to be the one that was behind ordering the attack there. And additionally, he directly assassinated Dorgi, or, well, I guess somewhat indirectly assassinated him. So we'll leave that at 1501 for now. Deneb, on the other hand, is... okay, that's a whole other story. Because, technically speaking, up to this point, she's still carrying over her war crimes from Zenobia. So essentially, in that case, it's unclear just how many, but clearly a basically limitless amount of villagers were decapitated by her for the purpose of her experiments. We're going to go ahead and, again, lowball this at about 100 here, and just kind of carry it on from there. We'll revisit her down the line, but for the time being, we're just going to go ahead and assume that 100 will do the job just fine. I apologize for doing this in like a... oops. Let's go ahead and undo that. For doing this in a kind of like shitty Photoshop manner. But this seemed like the easiest way to do it. Okay, next up, we already covered Lenar for the time being. As far as direct killing is concerned, we don't directly see Hamilton going out of his way for doing anything that isn't self-defense. He, technically speaking, could be considered an assassin if you got one of the endings in Zenobia. And additionally, if you, for example, did what I usually do and just turn him into a vampire and have him mindlessly eat stuff just because it's funny, then, arguably there's a case to be made there, but for the time being, he gets to remain pure. And then when it comes to Hector over here, in his case, he's implied again to have some hand in all the Galgastani atrocities, but I will again share that between them, leaving him at a kind of ballpark 100 for the time being, until we have more kind of accurate numbers down the road there, So we'll just go ahead and leave him there for now. Switch him... well, actually, I guess that 100 will work out just fine. In fact, actually, let's go ahead and say... let's go ahead and switch Tardy's number over here. Switch him over to kind of like a bluish, just to help it stand out a little bit more. These numbers are a little bit garish looking, but whatever, we'll get to it. So, okay, that's... so far, that's Balbatos looking pretty darn stacked there in terms of his blood war, but let's go ahead and continue on. Okay, torture or inhuman treatment, including biological experiments. Okay, so for this one, we can just go ahead and stack, I don't know, probably at least 500 onto Nebith over here, because biological experiments are 100% what he does the entire dang game. Now, I would rate this number higher, but he's one guy. There's realistically only so much he can do, and I know for a fact that he does not personally command more than 500 zombies over the course of the game. Obviously, there's implied to be a lot of failed experiments, but given time, resources, whatever else, my assumption is that he is not going to be able to get above 500 in the time that he's alive. Later on, maybe, but for the time being, that's kind of where that's at. Alright, next up, let's see here. As far as biological experiments and/or inhuman treatment, Oz over here seems to very much enjoy doing this kind of thing, but he also only seems to do it to certain people. We'll go ahead and stack him up to a 1200 here. Again, we're just ballparking it. However, Balzaphon over here seems to constantly love doing this, but again, he is still only one man. So we'll go ahead and add 30 to his score, but we do know for a fact that he gladly will go and take this kind of action against anybody that questions him, including Ozma in one of her endings, where if she discovers what he's done in the past, but doesn't end up reuniting with Hobram, he will actually leave her wheelchair bound and a vegetable. So either way, he loves doing that to people. Like, he just loves nothing more. So there's that. Okay. So, that will go ahead and be there. Let me see if I'm missing anything. In terms of inhuman treatment, Martin mostly seems to just go for the killing there. Most of these guys just seem to go for that. Let's see. I'm going to say that... Actually, wait a minute. We easily have to go and double up her score immediately. Because in her case, she once again would be... I just realized the problem in my little coloring scheme here is the fact that... Ew, what the hell was that? There we go. That looks a bit more correct. Either way, inhuman treatment, every one of those people that she turned into a pumpkin was inhumanely treated. On top of that, we actually can probably go ahead and add... how many are there? I want to say there's like 8 or so. Let's go ahead and add 8 to the count for her labor union that is also inhumanly treated. So we'll go ahead and add that there. Okay. Let's see. Willfully causing great suffering or serious injury to body and health. For this one, we definitely know that Tardy can add at least 1, because he does that exact thing to Hamilton. Let's see. Denim definitely gets this one. Actually, for the previous experimentation and whatever else, I know that we've all experimented with our builds at one point or another. So we'll just go ahead and assume that he's done that, I don't know, at least 20 times. And then on top of that, in terms of... let's see, in terms of willingly causing great suffering and serious injury to body or health, I feel like anytime we're going and throwing our rookies into the meat grinder to go help out somebody else, I'm sure there's at least another 20 of those in there, so we'll just go ahead and add them in. Obviously, there's no way to account for everything, but as far as I'm concerned, that seems about accurate. So we'll just go ahead and throw another 20 on, or another 40 onto there. Let's see, do we count Vice? Because in Vice's case, he mostly just can't seem to ever land the kill shot. He just attacks multiple times. I'm not sure that's necessarily going to account. Let's see, as far as Nibith, I don't feel like it would count as a secondary thing. Balzaphon, yeah, I mean, hell, we're just going to go ahead and slap another 100 on him. He's definitely done this at some point in the past. In fact, let's just go do it this way. Actually, let's not. Here, that zero's right there. I can just add it to the end, and there we go. As if this wasn't a completely scuffed way of doing it already. Let's just do it that way. Okay. So that'll be good right there. And then, just for the purpose of the fact that she has done this to at least every new player at least once, we're going to give her at least 3 counts of messing with everybody's mind by going and disappearing at random parts in the plot to Kashua, just because it leaves a lot of newer players very confused. It does make sense after years of playing the game, but honestly, it definitely always comes off as a bit of a weird thing. Alright, so let's go ahead and move on. Extensive destruction and appropriation of property not justified by military necessity and carried out unlawfully and wantonly. So we're just going to go ahead and add another, or not you. Where are you? Where's Dude Guy at? Where's Beef? Here we go. Here's Beef. So we'll just go ahead and add... I think this probably counts as another 500 for you, and there we go. We'll just go ahead and add another 500 to that score right there. And okay, so as far as he goes, like, he pretty brazenly goes and does what he feels like. Granted, it is technically ordered by Branton in this particular case, so we'll just go ahead and add half that. Actually, we'll add the same score to him in this case. Here, let's go add 20. There we go. putting Branton up at a score of 2001 and putting Barbas at a score of 5500, just because he seems very happy to carry out his orders, and I have a feeling in Branton's case, he probably had a little bit more legal justification, probably has better legal protections. I would assume Barbas would have a harder time defending himself, especially considering that his own commanders are going to throw him immediately under the bus afterwards. So, either way, that seems about right to me. Alright, compelling a prisoner of war or other protected person to serve in the forces of a hostile power. Okay, so for this particular one, we're just going to go ahead and give Tardy at least one, because he convinces Kashua to join her. And then we're also going to add the entirety of Denham's standard PSP party size here. I'm going to assume that most folks probably don't do more than 50 recruits, but either way, he's going to go ahead and individually add all of those counts to his pile. So there's that. Either way, basically, anytime you're recruiting somebody, you're recruiting them to fight against their own people for the most part. So it's realistically expected that that's just a thing that's happening there. Technically speaking, I mean, I don't. The whole thing with lands volunteering doesn't feel like it's willingly convincing anyone of anything. However, there's also definitely at least a few instances of this. We're going to say like 500 of them in the case of Vice. Now, the reason that his number goes up so significantly compared with Denham's there, in Denham's case, you're recruiting individual soldiers. In Vice's case, it's implied that he's got enough people to be a threat, but not enough to be a standing army. And, like, basically, he's got multiple people recruiting all over the place. 500 seems like a reasonable number to both be a threat and also not be enough to be an army, as far as I'm concerned. Again, I could be wrong on that. Feel free to recount these numbers as you will, but that's just kind of how I'm seeing this. All right. So, let's see. Willingly depriving a prisoner of war or other protected person of their rights, the rights of fair and regular trial. Yeah, that's going to be another one for you. Interestingly enough, you'd think Lennar would do this, but he actually does sort of give a trial. I don't know if it necessarily counts because he doesn't count the regular soldiers. Let's see. We're going to add 4 for the random soldiers that are in there because he primarily is trying Hector by means of executing everybody. But I mean, I feel like it's probably enough to make it work. Let's see. So, like, who else technically takes prisoners? Like, you kind of do, but they're recruited. Actually, no, Aerosel, right. So we'll go ahead and add 1 count for Aerosel there. Let's see, who else takes... takes prisoners that are deprived of their protections. I feel like the ones under Hector's care are probably pretty well taken care of. We'll add another 5,000 to Lednar Balbatos over here, because, frickin' Balmamusa. So... yes, he's getting counted multiple times for that whole incident. He wasn't even the one that killed them, but he is the one that put them in a labor camp. So there's that. All right, unlawful deportation or transfer of or unlawful confinement. Does anyone actually do this? Let's see. As far as willingly forcing people to move, it's kind of willing at that point. I'm trying to think between Branton and Balbatos here. Because if you think about it, in both their cases, like, everyone kind of knew what the deal was. It wasn't exactly willing deportation as much as everybody saw the fights coming and just bailed before they died. So, I don't know. Anyway, so, Section B, other serious violations of laws and customs applicable in international armed conflict within the established framework of international law, namely any of the following acts. So this one is specifically only for internationals. So this would be applying to Tardy, the Dark Knights, Balzavon especially, which I gotta say, for how much of an absolute asshole Balzafon is, currently he is looking a bit smelling like roses here. Also, if and when anything applies to Zenobia, this would also apply here. Alright, so intentionally directing attacks against the civilian population, against individual civilians, not taking direct part in hostilities. So again, this feels like another 500. Like, I think we're just going to count 500 as, like, large war crime that doesn't have a specified amount applied to it. So, either way, that's going to be another 500 over on him. Tardy did not order that attack. Martem and Oz were in other places. Actually, no, Martem was there, but he wasn't the one that ordered it. He was just having fun, which is messed up, but technically its own thing. Let's see, intentionally directing attacks against civilian objects, that is, objects which are not military objectives. This would be Rowdy Roderick for sure, which is already technically part of his count over here with his 500,000. Let's go ahead and move on. Intentionally directing attacks against personnel, installations, material, units, or vehicles involved in humanitarian assistance or peacekeeping missions in accordance with the Charter of the UN, as long as they are entitled to the protections given to civilians or civilian objects under the international law of armed conflict. So in this case, I would say Martem definitely gets one here because he is part of the attack that sees the White Knights taken out. Again, Oz isn't there. For this one, again, it's going to be another one on Barbas, since he is the one ordering the attacks. Again, feel free to argue with me on these scores, but as far as I see it, that's kind of fair there. There is one point, though, at which Denham willingly orders the attack of... orders an attack on doctors. So... for this particular one, he ends up getting a 500 here as well. Actually, wait, how much? There, it's supposed to be 591. There we go. So he willingly orders an attack on the Arcatros in the law route. I'm just going to count all of his kind of possible variations here. So in his particular case, I will count that as a major war crime there. Technically speaking, they do arm themselves over the course of the fight, and they're basically just using whatever they have on hand. But when you encounter them, they basically directly say that they are just doctors and they're trying to cure that guy. And like more or less it is directly stated that they are just there as a medical camp. So that is a straight war crime there. As far as I see it, Kasha was there. She doesn't try to stop it in any way. So she ends up adding that to her score as well. Vice has left at that point, so believe it or not, currently he is the lowest of the trio in terms of war crimes. Alright, so let's go ahead and continue on here. I'm trying to think if there were exceptions. I don't know for sure, but let's go ahead and carry on. Okay, so intentionally launching an attack in the knowledge that such attack will cause incidental loss of life or injury to civilians or damage to civilian objects or widespread long-term and severe damage to the natural environment, which would be clearly excessive in relation to concrete and direct overall military anticipated advantage. Okay, so for this one, Balbatos gets another 500. He does this pretty regularly. In terms of this guy over here, we'll just give him another 1,000. What's another 1,000 on the pile? Let's see. Technically speaking, you get access to the same weapons that Rowdy Roderick does. Not sure what's going on with the sound there. I apologize on that one. That was weird. Anyway, but technically speaking, you don't use them to that same effect. Arguably, the player does, in many situations, attack with excessive force on one unit or another. I would argue that that's not necessarily as insane as all that stuff typically would go. I would say Zabos typically acts pretty standard as far as just kind of defending his post. Technically speaking, as far as the Wallister, for the most part, they're pretty good about kind of keeping things in check outside of the stabbing part. Let's see. When Oz attacks that fortress, they mostly just take over the fortress without incident. I wouldn't say that there was anything too terribly excessive except for what he personally does, which we'll get to later. Let's see. I know that there's definitely one that I'm forgetting here. But we'll get to that as we'll get to it. Alright, so attacking or bombarding by whatever means towns, villages, dwellings, or buildings which are undefended and which are not military objectives. So let's see. This one's arguable, because pretty much everything's a military objective in Valeria. I would say probably add another 500 to these two here. Because over the course of attacking Goliath, like they just kind of go with it, but clearly it wasn't that much of an objective there. I would say we're gonna add another 500 to Balzaphon over here, because despite the fact that actually we're gonna add another 500 to Tardy as well, or add 500 to Tardy. Now the thing is, here's the weird part. If you think about it, Tardy didn't necessarily order the attack. Technically, Balzaphon does. He just doesn't do anything to stop it. I still consider that he would be part of that whole thing for not directly stopping it because he had the means to do so. But as far as like unnecessary attacks on a clearly civilian setting, I would say they're both responsible for that particular one. In fact, actually, let's go ahead and add 1,000 to each of those because we did count that as about 1,200 earlier. Or about 1,500 earlier. Again, I apologize for not having more exact numbers in some of these cases, but you know, there's going to be missing numbers sometimes. It's just a thing. Anyway, so let's go ahead and count it there. And yes, I realize that there are 1,000,001 flaws in my methods of accounting here, but whatever. This is just for fun, dang it. Feel free to argue it out in the comments there. Okay, so let's get back to it here. So next would be killing or wounding a combatant who, having laid down his arms or having no longer means of defense, has surrendered at discretion. So, does anybody actually do this? Let's see. In Dorgi's case, as far as we know, no. Let's see. For Nibith, he mostly just drags off dead bodies, so not so much. Branton isn't directly involved in the fighting. Balbatos probably totally would, but we don't have any direct evidence that he does. Kashua... Actually, shoot! This one's for Kashua, actually. Because she just, like, runs up and shanks a basically unarmed Lenar, so... Yeah, she gets that one. Deneb... Probably would, but we have no evidence for it. Rowdy Roddy probably also would, like, several times over, but again, we don't really see it. Does turning somebody into a Snapdragon count for Denim? Because he, like, I don't think you actually ever directly even have the choice to do this. Because when you, pretty much anytime a leader surrenders, their entire team surrenders. And in many cases, like, you just won't directly have the choice to even continue at that point. For example, when Veldre surrenders, mentioning her kid, he just immediately orders everyone to stand down. So I would say no, he's probably fine as far as that goes. Let's see. Hector is good, innocent little boy over there. Tardy? Does anybody directly surrender to him? I don't believe so. In Martim's case, no one really surrenders to him because they know that there's no point, so I don't know if that directly counts. Oz, yes. Technically speaking, it might also count as another thing that's coming up here, but he's going to get another 500 for doing this particular one, because in his particular case, like, he does directly, like in the case of the fortress, anybody that did surrender winds up dead, and anybody that happens to be their leader and happens to be named Saria is about to get the Bill Cosby experience when he gets there. So that's pretty fucked. Moving on, Balzaphon, I have no doubt that he would do it, but he probably would just play nice and poison them later. I feel like Lenar does at some point, but I'm trying to remember when. Actually, no, Lenar does obey this rule, because when you're on neutral and you do the execution fight, as soon as Hector surrenders or dies, everyone else is just allowed to live. So, no, I think he's fine. Technically speaking, Vice sort of does, because when the Duke does it, he ends up slicing his neck anyway. But that's a kind of in-the-moment, one-time thing, and also, like, I'm only counting it as the one individual thing instead of giving it the 500 for being a more major one. Which, again, I realize the flaws in that scoring system. It's just, as far as I'm concerned, it's pretty minor in his case. Let's see, in Barbas's case, usually everyone's just directly fighting him. I don't think we directly see anyone surrendering to him. Zabos, same thing. Alright. Making improper use of a flag of truce or the flag of a military insignia or uniform of the enemy or of the United Nations, as well as the distinctive emblems of the Geneva Conventions, resulting in death or serious personal injury. Yeah, looking at you over there, Mr. Ronway. Basically, so in neutral, technically this plays out differently in different routes, but in neutral, the Lodicians are ready to hand over the islands to the Wallister. Ronway decides that he's going to try to take him out instead. Basically goes there as a truce, captures Tartaros, and then attempts and basically orders his soldiers to take the town in the meantime. Either way, it's the thing that results in his death, that results in Tardy going back and keeping the Dark Knights on the island instead of leaving. In many cases, like, it's a colossal fuck-up that just continues the plot at that point. But yeah, he plays himself pretty hard there. So, let's see. Are there any other times when anyone directly does this? Not really. I don't think, anyway. Could be wrong on this, but I don't think so. Okay. So next is to transfer directly or indirectly by the occupying power of parts of its own civilian population into the territory it occupies, or the deportation or transfer of all parts of the population of the occupied territory within to outside this territory. I'm going to just throw another 5,000 onto Balbatos's pile for this, because that's basically what he does with Balmamusa, and definitely more, but we only directly know of that. Alright, intentionally directing attacks against buildings dedicated to religion, education, arts, science, or charitable purposes, historic monuments, hospitals, or places where the sick and wounded are collected, provided they are not military objectives. This is where we would count another one against Denham for attacking that temple, but it is technically a military objective at the time. There are no times, as far as I recall, where you're defending a religious location, though technically speaking... What's interesting is that, Prancet, the dad there, is often... I mean, basically the guy is seen as a priest or whatever else, and he's dragged out of a building that looks church-shaped, but it seems to just be a house. I don't think they actually live in a church, so I don't think that directly counts. Technically, we could say that when there was the kidnapping of the Pope there, or not the Pope, the guy I always call the Pope, that's the Branton orders, so we'll go ahead and add another 500 to his pile. Alright. Subjecting persons who are in the power of an adverse party to physical mutilation or to medical or scientific experiments of any kind, which are neither justified by the medical, dental, or hospital treatment of the person concerned, or carried out in his or her interest, which already cause death to or seriously endanger the health of such person or persons. These are ones that we've already counted for both Nibith and Mardem, as well as Oz to a different extent. I would say, technically speaking, just for the extra poisonings, we're just going to go ahead and add another 200 to you. Here, let's go ahead and take that off there. I don't know what his number... I think it's supposed to be 2,200, isn't it? There we go. Either way, we'll add more to him, because technically he's still poisoning people in different ways, and also there's a lot of, basically brain-dead people that he's created over the years. We'll just add more to his pile because... Anyway, let's see. Killing or wounding treacherously individuals belonging to the hostile nation or army. This feels like something that everybody does just as a matter of everyday life. I'm not sure if that necessarily counts. I don't know, we'll just add 100 to everybody, I guess. Let's see, 100 for you, except we should probably change this to a different color, like a bright red. Let's see, change you to 600. Give you your 1100. Give you, as if it even matters for you. Add another one to your pile. I'm sure that pile will stop growing at some point. It's going to take the Hague a while for you. We'll just say, after he joins you, I don't think these two are even, they don't even use, whatever. Okay, we're going to ignore those two. They're going to come out of this thing smelling like roses, dang it. In Vice's case, I'm going to make an exception because he keeps constantly using ninjas in his teams, so it's fair to assume that he's probably going to wind up with some pretty messed up bodies at the end of it. So either way, minor score differences. Let's go ahead and leave it somewhere along those lines. So we'll just assume everybody's fought at least 100 other people by the end of the story. That's the assumption here. Because we know in the case of even in the case of something like Hamilton, he's a guy that has been he's been fighting people for years at this point. He's definitely maimed at least a few of them. So either way, it's just, especially given the setting, a lot of the fights are going to end in maimings. It's just, yeah. All right. Declaring that no quarter will be given. Interestingly enough, this doesn't come up as often as you'd think. I'd say that this comes up minorly for Branton, but he's still willing to negotiate. I think we've already counted Balbatos for this particular one, like, several times over at this point. So we'll just leave him as is. Deneb is... I mean, does that even count in her case? It's a labor dispute. Let's see... Hamilton basically just gets himself almost killed for that particular thing. You always give the option for somebody to surrender. Hector and Zabos are... I mean, it's weird to see them kind of functioning at the same score. I guess, technically speaking, we could argue to an extent that Zabos tells everybody to fight to the death a few times, but I have a feeling that he didn't need to give that order, is the thing. Actually, no, okay. Technically, Barbas. Because he tells everybody, kill everybody, take the town. So there's that. I don't recall Vice ever saying that, unless... Okay, actually, we know that Lenar does, at Balma Musa, which, by extension, should extend over to Ronway there. Because, again, it's implied that he gave that order. Let's see. Balzaphon kind of does this for Goliath. Because he basically just says, hey, I'm bored, kill everybody. So, okay, we'll go ahead and leave that about there. Actually, no, I think... Does Martin give that order or no? I want to say he's just having too much fun stabbing people and he doesn't really care. Okay, we'll leave that as is for the time being. Okay. Destroying or seizing the enemy's property unless such destruction or seizure be imperatively demanded by the necessities of the war. This depends on what kind of playthrough you're doing, because I know in Denham's case, this could easily add another 50 to that count, which is what I'm going to go ahead and add to there. Mostly because in a lot of cases, they added so many new collectibles in Reborn that you have every reason to go and just kill off everything on the map, even though their leader surrendered. And mostly just for the purpose of going and pillaging their stuff. And additionally going and taking out the fortresses in order to then go pillage the elemental temples underneath. We could actually argue that that's probably... If we give him a score for 10 for every one of those, we'll just go ahead and say 820 would be his current score now, 821. Because it's kind of like... It's technically assaulting a religious building. All of the elements are a religion, so... Alright. And technically, neither Vice nor Cashuat has to participate in all of that. Alright. So, declaring abolished, suspended, or inadmissible in court of law the rights and actions of the nationals of the hostile party. Again, I feel like this all would just get tied in with the same stuff we've already counted against Balbatos over here. And moving on. Compelled the nationals of the hostile party to take part in the operations of war directly against their own country, even if they were in the belligerent service before the commencement of the war. This is one that I feel we've already counted as far as recruitment technically being a war crime in these games. Let's say pillaging a town or place, even when taken by assault, technically speaking, can be part of Denham's pile, though I feel in most cases nobody ever picks that option. we could technically count it, like if you let them sack the city, but again, just like nobody ever picks that option. So either way, I'm going to assume no on that one. For the rest of them, how often do they actually pillage stuff directly? Because most of the time they do have a reason, and it's primarily just for the city itself, like to claim the territory itself. I feel like it would mostly be Barbas that does this, but we've already counted Barbas for the same attack on Rhyme so many times now. Anyway. Alright, so employing poison or poisoned weapons. This will automatically go ahead and give another over to Denim here, because I'm fairly certain everybody does at least 100 poison attacks on their weapon over the course of the run. None of these other characters will employ poison in their weapons except for Mardem. He'll go ahead and also presumably do 100 poison attacks at least with his weapon, and we'll go ahead and move on. Alright, employing asphyxiating, poisonous, or other gases, along with analogous liquids, materials, or devices. Strange as this sounds, almost everybody in Reborn switches over to direct fire damage, except for Denim, who will also just continue employing those particular things. So there's that. In fact, I believe that was another one of those reasons that I believe that the way that debuffs were specifically changed in Reborn partially, while I do believe the primary point was to make monster units more of a thing, it does also feel a lot more appropriate when all of the other commanders are going and specifically following these more modern rules of war, and then you show up like, yeah, but nobody said I couldn't do war crimes yet. So, either way, I just love that as a general idea here. That being said, though, technically we do see Oz employing some of these during a cutscene, so we'll actually add another 100 to him here. Additionally, we see... Actually, we actually see Barbas doing his whole poison shtick a few times, so we'll go ahead and give him extra for that. Technically speaking, I feel like Barbas' finisher is also kind of a war crime because it encases him in stone. Technically speaking, the Fusiliers that he uses, I believe, can also inflict silence, if I'm not mistaken. So we'll go ahead and put that on there as well. Technically, Vice's ninjas occasionally will use silencing arrows as well, which will count for asphyxiation. So that sounds about right there. Alright, employing bullets which expand or flatten easily in the human body, such as bullets with a hard envelope which does not entirely cover the core, or is pierced with incisions. Technically speaking, I would say that of these leaders, you've got both Barbas and, what's-his-face, and Branton. They're going to be employing Fusiliers, which at this point, basically that would be, like, musket rounds would more or less be all they've got, and those things would absolutely tear somebody up in really horrific ways. Alright, employing weapons, projectiles, and materials, and methods of war which are of a nature to cause superfluous injury or unnecessary suffering, of which are inherently indiscriminate in violation of the international law of armed conflict, provided that such weapons, projectiles, and material and methods of warfare are subject to a comprehensive prohibition and are included in an annex to the statute. Okay, so basically, despite the fact that the first half of this, so employing weapons, projectiles, and materials which are of a nature to cause superfluous injury, the thing is, none of that stuff is banned. It's funny because even in FFT, they have a section where a guy launches a bunch of poison bombs, and they're like, oh shoot, this stuff is banned for a reason. And in this case, that doesn't ever happen. Like, despite the fact that we technically counted poisons and whatever else as minor infractions up to this point, oddly enough, mostly everybody just seems to, well, seems to more or less just see this stuff as normal. So the only one that actually uses stuff that's technically banned and continues to do so would be Deneb, who even has a shop for a bunch of forbidden weapons and things. So, I mean, technically speaking, also the forbidden magics, which would add another 100 over to these guys over here, as if any of that particularly counts at this point. Either way, I'm just giving it a minor score though, just because technically speaking, it's like it's not exactly internationally banned or whatever else. It's just technically forbidden or looked down upon in the local area. Otherwise, all of the rest of the stuff everybody just sort of sees as normal. Even when Barbas shows up like, yeah, check it out, I'm gonna poison you real good, nobody really seems to blink an eye. So, there's that too. Alright, committing outrages upon personal dignity, and particularly humiliating and degrading treatment, followed up by committing the Bill Cosby experience, related slavery, enforced money for nookie, forced multiplication. Anyway, let's just say all crimes related to below the waist. This will add another 500 for the major category over to Oz. Yeah, that dude's a prick. Anyway, so there's that. As far as other humiliating stuff, let's see, humiliating and or below the waist related. I kind of feel like Deneb would count for this, because the stuff that she does in Zenobia would still carry over to here, and she's basically taking people, removing their heads, replacing them with a pumpkin, and then forcing them to work as slaves. So that counts, and I would say that definitely falls in the major category there. So we'll add another to her score there. Okay, utilizing the presence of civilian or other protected persons to render certain points, areas, or military forces immune from military operations. I think everyone considers everything fair game. Intentionally directing attacks against buildings, material, medical units, and transport. We more or less already covered this one. Starvation of civilians is a method of warfare by depriving them of objects and indispensable to their survival. Would that mean that one CEO from Australia that was telling people that workers needed to starve in order to respect them more? Would that count as a business war crime now that I think about it? Screw that guy. Anyway, let's see next. Conscripting or enlisting children under the age of 15. I did actually check. It doesn't appear... The only character that shows up in the Warner Report under 15 that is not a baby is Claire, and she is directly saved by Hamilton. So we'll just go ahead and actually remove any of his dismembering war crimes from earlier and reduce that down to a 1. Anyway, so in the case of an armed conflict not of international character, serious violations of Article 3 are as follows: violence to life and person, in particular murder of all kinds, mutilation, cruel treatment, and torture. We already covered that. Committing outrages upon personal dignity, taking hostages, passing of sentences, and carrying out executions without previous judgment pronounced by a constituted court. Technically, I'm going to count this as a minor thing for Lenar here, because in context it feels appropriate. It kind of feels like everybody agreed to it, but it's also not technically legal, so they kind of go by like a whole Knight's Honor kind of shtick. Anyway, let's move on to the next one. So, paragraph 2 applies to armed conflicts not of international character. Other serious violations of laws and customs applicable in armed conflicts not of an international character within the established framework of yada yada. Internationally or intentionally directing attacks against civilian or populations, covered that. Direct attacks against buildings, directing attacks against personnel. This seems to be all of the same stuff. Okay. So, let's see. Yeah, that should be about all of it. That's all of the things on that list there. So this would mean that using my extraordinarily flawed counting method here, on the lowest end, we have Hamilton, who comes out looking, who basically just comes out smelling like roses from this whole thing, with basically a count of 1 on account of self-defense kills that he's done over the course of the game. Now, technically speaking, depending on which stuff you consider canon, he could also have been guilty of stuff that would put him still in the under 1,000 category, probably about 500 or so. But still, that dude does practically nothing wrong. Anyway, next lowest on the list here is going to be Hector over here. Oops, didn't mean to do that. Undo that move, please. Who's going to be coming with a score of 100, just on account of incidental stuff that he was ordered to do in his local area. That doesn't seem to have extended particularly far, and additionally he seems to have gone out of his way to try to avoid war crimes where possible. including several situations where he directly orders his soldiers to basically nowhere locations in order to avoid fights entirely and get himself sacrificed in the process. So either way, that dude's coming out just fine. Surprisingly, Zabos over here is doing pretty alright, with a score of only 200, because again, he's primarily just defending his own area. He talks big about people needing to pick sides, but ultimately he doesn't seem to actually have done that much himself. And additionally, Dorgalawa, of all people, is even lower than him, having essentially been able to get through most of his issues with, well, his big army and diplomacy. We don't know exactly what he did, but all in all, we mostly see that he seems to have done a pretty solid job of getting everybody together through one means or another. It doesn't seem like any particular war crime stuck out in the long run. He did eventually end up getting himself trapped in hell by Branton here, who ultimately just turned him into this frickin' abomination. So either way, he seems to have been a terrible dad and husband, but overall seems to have been a law-abiding ruler, for the most part. Next lowest would be surprisingly Nibith over here, who pretty much just collects dead bodies. He doesn't really go out of his way to kill people that often and seems to avoid fights, and mostly seems to be doing his whole thing for the purpose of medical research, considering that there's no established medical field in the area. So, all in all, surprisingly not that bad of a dude. Next lowest under him is Vice, who, depending on which route you decide to go on, either ends up starting a resistance against you, or potentially ends up kind of joining the rebellion in Balmamusa, but also appears to just sort of leave as soon as everything starts, so I'm not sure technically whether we can directly count that. Like, later on he's joining hunting parties looking for you, but it doesn't directly state whether or not he ever actually fights anything. Again, he leaves pretty much immediately. It is possible that he was going and counting, taking kills off screen, but if we're assuming the version that survives through the story, the law version, he's coming out looking pretty good there. Alright. Next lowest at that point would be Deneb, who was, again, decapitating villagers and humiliatingly turning them into gourd people and then using them as slaves, which breaks multiple laws along the way. Next lowest at that point would be Kashua, who again goes out of her way to go kill an unarmed person at one point. I mean, technically unarmed. It's more like his weapon's put away and he's there to talk, but she stabs him in the neck anyway. And additionally goes along with some of the things that the Denim does as well. So either way, we could technically argue that there's another 5,000 to add to every one of these as well. Actually, we should probably just go ahead and add that real quick. So, let's go ahead and say 2, 5, 121, or 6, 121. Depending on how this goes. I'm going to adjust you real quick. It's kind of depending entirely on how you want to see it. So depending on what route they go down. Because interestingly enough, even when Vice ends up going down the Chaos route and stuff like that, while he does occasionally kill stuff and whatever else, he still doesn't seem to necessarily do that much worse than many of the other people around. Anyway, so either way, anywhere from 1100 to 6100 for Kashua there. Also 1100 to 6100 for Denim, primarily because they're usually in the same place at the same time. In most cases, being a situation where they either committed a genocide or they didn't, and or they also use a lot of various debuffs that would technically count as war crimes, and additionally convince people to fight their own countrymen against their will. They do obviously end up joining, technically speaking, but you do have to beat them into submission in order to do it, which means that they're not exactly necessarily doing it, completely willingly to begin with. It wasn't a volunteer gig. All right. Next, surprisingly, both Lenar and the Duke end up above Mardem and Oz. So Mardem and Oz more or less wind up in the same score there. Again, deeply flawed method. whatever, argue in the comments. Branton ends up below them because he's primarily just giving the orders, not actually carrying the things out. As far as both Oz and Martin, they just seem to enjoy doing that stuff way too much. Underneath all of them is their commander there with 1753, with Tartaros. For the most part, he seems to be trying to keep the peace. He just has a really bad track record of hiring the wrong people. He doesn't directly do that much and seems to directly kind of give orders contrary to a lot of the war crimes that happen, but he also doesn't stop the ones that he could have stopped. He does try to stop, or he technically probably would have stopped Rhyme if he knew about it, but that just sort of happens on a whim. So either way, that's just kind of down there. Additionally, we have then Lennar and Ronway just way the hell up on the top of the list there, both being directly responsible. Oh, I didn't even mention Balsfon. As usual, he just sneaks by, all sneaky-like down here. But either way, these two are directly responsible for Balmamusa. They did it willingly. They knew why they were doing it. No questions asked. You know, they got what they got. Technically, Ronway is a bit more responsible on account of some of the stuff that he did, but Lennar still has a few extra blemishes on his record as well. And additionally, we have Barbas, who again did the same thing, but for Rhyme this time. So he's pretty close up to the top of the list. Second highest is going to be Lunar Balbatos, who basically was running a genocide for a while there. And obviously that ended up giving him a pretty reasonably high score. Arguably, it could be way higher. As far as I'm aware, we don't know what the exact score was. But given that the Wallister are a relative minority in the region, and that the biggest concentration of Wallister is at 5,000, I'm going to assume that the numbers that were given are roughly equating to this. I'd be glad to revisit this whole idea if somebody has some different numbers on hand. This is, again, just kind of for fun. And then, obviously, way the hell up there, beyond anybody else, is Rowdy Roderick, showing up with his Apocrypha nukes and just basically annihilating everything in his path until suddenly some of his own people decided to kill him. So, yeah, dude went crazy from just going full Oppenheimer on that crap. So, that's not great. I mean, for those that missed the lore implications, San Bronza only exists because he ended up blowing up the place so many times that it just permanently stayed in the sky. The entire icy tundra area is entirely just because he froze it over, to the point that all of the frozen Apocrypha stuff just ended up leaving it permanently frozen or something like that. That there's several areas that are just deserts entirely because he blew away all of the nature there. So, either way, for vaporizing entire cities, for destroying all the buildings within, for going out of his way to be an absolute monster there, that was Rowdy Roderick. He's a side boss. Anyway, so let me know how terrible you think this counting method was, and let me know what you think. I thought this was a fun little project, and yeah, y'all have yourselves a good one. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.